thank you for joining me for another short art reflection. I thought that we would think together this evening about a piece which you may look at initially and think, well, is that actually an artwork? It's a statement in many ways. It's a piece of text. And if you've seen any of the others of these, you may have realised by now that I'm very interested in the way in which text and image often relate in pictures. The words themselves sort of become the image in this case. This is a painted canvas with the words "I am a man" painted onto the surface. This is from the collections of the National Gallery of Art in Washington. And in a moment we'll look at a related piece that's in the Tate collection. The piece that I'm looking at the moment is from 1988. It's by an artist called Glenn Ligon, and it has a number of sort of specific contexts built into it really. I wonder if you've seen those words before. I wonder if they mean anything to you. They may do, they may not. But to really understand it, we sort of have to go back before the artwork itself. Firstly to 1952, when an African-American novelist wrote a book called Invisible Man. And the words of this quotation, they're not a direct quotation, they're a reference really to a phrase in that book. "I am an invisible man." And the character explains how he is an invisible man, not because he is a ghost or a spectre, but because people do not notice him, they do not see him. So it's a novel which really thinks about issues of identity and especially race. And as such, those words were ripe for assimilation in 1968, when that novel would still have been in people's consciousness, during a period of strikes and protest marches in Memphis. It began in February 1968 when some black sanitation workers had been appallingly treated by their white supervisors. They'd been subjected to inequality and injustice, and also to dangerous and outmoded equipment. And a couple of them had in fact died. And this gave way to strikes and protest marches, and eventually, as tensions rose, Martin Luther King even went to Memphis to speak to the workers. And in fact, the day after that speech, he was assassinated. So in 1968, if you had seen these words, which were the words used on the placards of those protesters, then it would have been a little bit like seeing the phrase "I can't breathe" in the aftermath of George Floyd. So they're words that had very particular connotations and particular power. Now, Glenn Ligon reuses them 20 years later for his canvas. He takes them away from the placard and he puts them onto a canvas in 1988. And in some ways, maybe he's testing his audience's memory. Will they still remember the original context of those words and that typography and the underlining of the word "am"? I am a man. I deserve human treatment. I deserve equality with everybody else in the human race. But they might also have remembered, if they had a good memory, that the placards looked slightly different from the canvas. The words have been slightly rearranged, if you notice. No longer on 2 lines, they are on 3. And if you could see past the black and white photograph that I'm showing you, you would have seen that the original words were in red as opposed to being in black. The subtle alteration of those words on the canvas, the subtle alteration of the format of those in taking them from the placard that was used during the strike and placing them onto a canvas, sort of represents them. So the context has been changed, it's been placed into an art gallery, and I wonder what you think that does to those words. Perhaps it gives them a slightly aggrandized status. It makes them important somehow. It immortalizes them. And so in some ways this is an artwork which is a memorial to those sanitation workers and to the strike, and perhaps even to Martin Luther King and his assassination in that context. Now, Glenn Ligon came back to this artwork 22 years after making that original canvas. And I'm now showing you a piece called Condition Report, and this is in Tate's collection. This is from 2000. So these words have borne coming back to. And now they have been reprinted, as it were, and little notes have been added to the surface of the second iteration of them. So there are 2 frames here, and in the second one you can see that condition report notes have been added to show us what has changed in the 22 years since this was made. So there are little comments there. Hairline crack. canvas thread, loss at edge, brown drops, red paint, rust-coloured droplets, dark spot, rubbed, dark scrape, all sorts of little fairly inconsequential minor notes about the way in which that painting has worn over 22 years. And those notes sort of conflict, I think, and they compete with the original lettering on the surface of the picture. They're the marks of the physical object. The canvas itself has become marked over time. Its condition has changed over 22 years in the same way as a man or a human being is marked over time. I wonder what a condition report of us might say. Wrinkle here, grey hair there, skin blemish here, scar there. I wonder what's changed in 22 years in us. And in 22 years in society, in fact, I think more importantly, perhaps not enough, it seems, and perhaps in the 21 years since the condition report was done, still not enough has changed. In many ways, these are trivial notes that have been placed around the border of this reproduction of the picture, tiny things, when actually, instead of a hairline crack, what was needed was a chasm, a real shift in perspectives, a real shift in attitudes, which Glenligan seems to say hasn't happened since 1968. And perhaps in the light of the events over the last year, you might agree with him. I wonder who you think is speaking these words. Are these the words of Ralph Ellison, the novelist? Are these the words of the sanitation workers who have gone on strike? Are they the words of Glenligan? Or are they also perhaps words that we recognise as belonging to God as well? Words have different connotations, don't they, depending on their context. They're passed down, they're subtly altered over time, they're quoted, they might be adopted through history, they might take on another meaning or a further significance, which is slightly different from the one with which they started. They're in some ways just black symbols on a white page, aren't they? The words play with each other, both visually and as regards their meaning. And if you look at the way that Glenligan has placed those on the page, in separating out a and man, I am at the top, man at the bottom, they seem to echo each other. Man seems to mirror I am, with such similar letters in both lines. The shape of the lines is balanced and it echoes each other. It's made into something that looks roughly symmetrical. Black forms on a white page might be one way of thinking about the way in which the black workers of 1968 were being treated within a world of white supremacy. The very fact that those words have been changed into black from the red that was on the sanitation workers' placards may suggest that actually we should read this as I am a black man. Perhaps there should be some racial identity read into those words. Glenligan himself is a black American artist. But of course, I am is also the name that God gives himself when he speaks to Moses from the burning bush. And it is as a man that he comes to earth in the person of Jesus. The great I am becomes a physical human being. And of course, that great I am is also the Word, who John tells us in his Gospel was there from the very beginning. And I think that spiritual connotation is not lost on Glenligan, and it wouldn't have been lost on Martin Luther King as he witnessed those protest marches. And it's not lost on us, is it? Some words here from Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 to 8. Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And it strikes me as we keep going towards Easter that on the cross, Jesus has his identity conflated with his crime. When that placard is nailed above his head, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, that is both his identity and it is a statement of the reason why he is hanging on that cross. His identity is his crime. And we may feel that identity and crime have been conflated with each other all too many times in the past, and perhaps still today in ways that should have changed and maybe haven't. But we have a God who says, I am from the beginning, I am who I am, and yet is also willing to become like us, a human. He's willing to have his identity conflated with that of ours and nailed as a sign above his head. And as Jesus hangs on the cross, perhaps he says, I am a man. And he also says, I can't breathe. And he says, your life matters.